Greetings everyone. Here are the main points in today's video. Novorossiysk naval base engulfed in flames. The last stronghold of the Russian fleet has been breached. An unprecedented coordinated strike operation combining 15 advanced domestic weapon systems of Ukraine has crippled Moscow's most powerful pair of corvettes, turning threats from the Kremlin into a bitter defeat before the eyes of the world. Behind-the-scenes diplomatic maneuvers, a turning point from a secret call by G.D. Vance to Kyiv. What are the billion-dollar economic calculations behind Washington's sensitive request for restraint, and why did President Zelensky agree to this unexpected condition while holding the upper hand in the Black Sea? The energy nightmare and the silent general mobilization cast a shadow over Russia. When the Osk oil refinery, 1,400 kilometers from the front line, was paralyzed for half a year, it triggered a wartime fuel distribution system. Tens of thousands of young Russians were shocked to receive draft orders sent directly to their email inboxes with no way to escape. Why did Russia's advanced air defense shield miss its target?
It's hard to believe a veteran US Navy expert exposes the weapons quality crisis behind the failure of the Pantsir system, while also revisiting the shocking intelligence lessons from the Gulf War in 1990. Welcome to the analysis program of Military Affairs Discussion. Before we get into the details, we kindly ask you to take a few seconds to like the video and subscribe to the channel to support the team. Thank you to our audience. Putin is furious as Ukraine attacks and the port of Novorossiysk catches fire.
The Russian Navy has lost its refuge. Dear audience,
the battlefield situation today is no longer like the early days of 2022, and the Kremlin seems to be facing a very harsh reality. On August 13th, President Vladimir Putin issued a warning that carries significant risks, with enormous strategic implications when he publicly threatened that if European countries do not immediately stop tightening sanctions targeting Russia's shadow fleet transporting oil, Moscow will be forced to carry out retaliatory strikes,
directly targeting Western cargo ships and oil tankers on the Black Sea front.
The power to decide the fate of Russian warships has long been out of Moscow's hands and now completely depends on the combat capabilities and precise strikes of the Ukrainian military. That is why the former pride,
the Russian Black Sea Fleet, had to reluctantly withdraw from the Crimean Peninsula, abandoning the historic Sevastopol base to seek refuge at the Novorossiysk naval port. However,
that hundreds of kilometers of geographical distance still could not provide the safety that the Kremlin had hoped for. Right after Moscow's deterrent statements,
Ukraine immediately responded with fierce attacks, exposing a bitter truth to the whole world. The actual combat capability of the Russian Navy has been almost completely paralyzed. One of Russia's main naval bases was engulfed in flames, leaving the remaining warships with absolutely nowhere to hide.
Right at the peak of this escalating tension, a completely unexpected political development appeared on the international diplomatic stage. Senator G.D. Vance personally picked up the phone and called Kyiv directly with a proposal that was entirely beyond what observers had predicted, and Ukraine's response was even more astonishing. At the same time,
the Ukrainian armed forces also began to carry out a strategic move that was unprecedented since the outbreak of the conflict. We will analyze this right now. The Novorossiysk naval base was engulfed in flames.
The last stronghold of the Russian fleet was breached. The source of the Kremlin's fury came from the actions of European Union countries, led by Italy,
has started moving from paper barriers to actual enforcement actions, imposing tough sanctions on the ground. At the beginning of this month,
an Italian-led law enforcement force directly boarded and inspected an oil tanker suspected of transporting goods serving Russia's financial interests to ensure compliance with European law. Although these ships often use flags of convenience from third countries to disguise themselves, the nature of the cargo inside remains the economic lifeblood of Moscow. As these trade loopholes begin to be closed, Russia immediately loses its flexibility and maintaining revenue becomes more difficult than ever. This situation has forced President Putin to continue using his familiar weapon, tough threats, to showcase deterrent power. Speaking to the media, he spoke out, accusing the recent decisions of the European Union of being blatant violations of international maritime law, and called the Western countries' attempts to block, seize cargo ships, and confiscate Russia's economic assets acts of organized robbery and piracy. The Russian leader warned that if this situation continues, Moscow will respond with proportional actions, and these measures will not be limited to the waters where the incidents occurred, but will be deployed on any sea route worldwide that Russia deems necessary and appropriate. This warning did not stop with the head of the Kremlin. Former President Dmitry Medvedev, one of the representatives of the hardline stance in Moscow, quickly echoed with equally threatening statements. Mr. Medvedev publicly declared that Western countries have no right to restrict commercial ships flying intermediary flags but carrying goods serving Russia's interests. He also argued that most Western European merchant ships are also operating under similar convenient flags. From there, he asserted that Russia has the full right to attack any commercial vessel of hostile countries on international waters if there is reason to suspect that the ship is carrying goods for the enemy, accompanied by a firm statement that the Russian military is fully capable of expanding its operations far beyond the Black Sea. However, those threats to expand the battlefield to the oceans become highly contradictory when compared to the actual situation on the battlefield. How can a naval force extend its control to distant international waters when even in its own home waters it can no longer maintain the initiative? This is not a one-sided interpretation but a historical fact, confirmed by Russian sources and officials through international news agencies since 2024. The Sevastopol naval base, a strategic symbol tied to the Black Sea Fleet for decades since the Soviet era, has been completely neutralized by long-range firepower and unmanned devices from Ukraine. The strategic withdrawal to Novorossiysk was once seen as a lifeline solution. However, the recent intense developments have proven that in modern warfare, distance is no longer a shield to guarantee safety for military miscalculations. Now, the Russian Black Sea Fleet now seems to have fallen into the bitter situation of a navy unable to find refuge even in the very waters where they once held absolute dominance. The strategic withdrawal from Crimea to Novorossiysk not only failed to bring safety, but also further exposed Moscow's critical weakness in coastal defense. The night of August 11 became a new tragic chapter in the conflict, as swarms of Ukrainian kamikaze drones launched from deep inland, piercing the darkness and heading straight south toward the remaining Russian warships huddled in the Novorossiysk naval base. Authentic footage from the scene clearly showed the utter shock of local residents as the initial flickering lights, mistaken for a mysterious phenomenon, quickly turned into the roar of bombs and gunfire. Faced with this unexpected saturation attack, the entire Russian air defense network in Novorossiysk was activated in a state of utter chaos. The night sky over the coastal city lit up like daylight as countless streams of anti-aircraft fire and interceptor missiles were unleashed into the air. However,
that fierce resistance was completely powerless against Ukraine's sophisticated, coordinated firepower tactics. Multiple layers of defense were breached, leaving a blazing scene and severe losses that even the Kremlin's media apparatus could not conceal. The scale of destruction from the raid was quickly independently confirmed by numerous reputable sources, from Euromaidan press news agency, official statements from the Ukrainian government, to even well-known Russian military bloggers. 4 main warships of the Black Sea Fleet suffered heavy damage, including a patrol ship, a missile frigate, and especially the pair of advanced stealth frigates, Admiral Makarov and Admiral Essen. These are the most modern surface warships that Russia still maintains in the Black Sea, serving as mobile launch platforms that have repeatedly unleashed devastating caliber cruise missile barrages on Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure. This lightning strike has almost completely eliminated the Russian Navy's long-range maritime deterrence capability. What particularly astonished international military observers was the leap in asymmetric warfare tactics announced by President Volodymyr Zelensky immediately after the operation. For the first time since the conflict began, Ukraine conducted a large-scale joint operation, simultaneously combining up to 15 different types of weapons and unmanned vehicles against a single critical target. The list of participating weapons showcased breakthrough technologies from Ukraine's defense industry, including the improved long-range Neptune cruise missile, Long Neptune, Palyanicia rocket missile, and various UAVs such as Peklo, Base, Leo, Liuti, Zobels from research and manufacturing complexes such as Firepoint, Rounds Up, Sechem, and even kamikaze unmanned surface vehicles or USVs named Mamai and Sagan. The key game-changing point here is that all of this equipment was researched, designed and manufactured entirely domestically. Thanks to absolute technological autonomy, Kyiv no longer has to wait for any approval or depend on the political limitations of the West when choosing targets. At the same time, it is gradually realizing its ambition to build a shield, an autonomous missile system to escape dependence on expensive systems like the Patriot. The backstage diplomatic chessboard, a turning point from a secret call by Zedivans to Kyiv, right as Ukraine's long-range strikes were upending the strategic game. An unexpected diplomatic breakthrough took place behind the scenes when the US Vice President-elect J.D. Vance personally picked up the phone to call President Zelensky with a sensitive request directly related to these attack operations.
while the international community was anxiously waiting for the next moves. On the ground in Novorossiysk the next morning, the tragic reality of war was laid bare. A massive column of black smoke still covered the military bay as people woke up and went to work in unprecedented terror. 8 hours of shock from late night to early morning shattered all illusions of a safe rear, turning even the most fortified naval bases into fragile targets before the wave of modern warfare technology. Extreme panic spread throughout the community of residents and tourists in Novorossiysk as the harsh reality of the conflict came right before their eyes. Local social media forums were flooded with anxious questions about whether to cancel vacations and find a way to escape. Amid the chaos of the night raids, some civilian infrastructure, residential houses and personal vehicles in the urban area were damaged. However, Kyiv's attacks always focused on high-value military targets and naval equipment. Scattered damage to vehicles and civilian homes was actually an inevitable consequence of the millions of anti-aircraft rounds and interceptor missile fragments fired by Russian firepower systems. The request from Washington was clearly strategic, demanding that the Ukrainian military strictly refrain from attacking oil tankers and energy infrastructure not owned by the Russian Federation in the Black Sea region. This direct interaction surprised many observers, especially when looking back at previous high-level meetings in the Oval Office, where Mr. J. Vance was previously absent. However, the swift consensus from Kyiv exposed a complex economic and political calculation behind the scenes. The focus of this negotiation revolved around the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, commonly known as the CPC pipeline. This is a massive crude oil transport route from Kazakhstan's oil fields, running through Russian territory to storage tanks at the port of Novorossiysk before being loaded onto tankers bound for destinations around the world. The key point is that leading American energy corporations hold significant shares in Kazakhstan's oil fields as well as in the consortium operating this pipeline. Realizing the risk of global supply disruption and direct losses to Western energy tycoons, the White House had to intervene quickly. Ukraine demonstrated diplomatic shrewdness by agreeing to this request under strict conditions. Kyiv pledged not to target cargo ships or pipelines serving international partners as long as they did not transport Russian-owned oil, even though the Kremlin still collects a certain transit fee from this route. However, that restraint could completely change this winter. If Russia continues its devastating attacks on Ukraine's energy network, not stopping at neutralizing the enemy navy in Novorossiysk, Ukraine's art of warfare on the same night demonstrated incredible coordination. Swarms of long-range suicide drones simultaneously penetrated deep into Russian territory, delivering precise strikes on a series of strategic oil refineries. By directly targeting the heart of the war economy and Moscow's fuel processing infrastructure, Kyiv is gradually reviving the specter of an energy crisis right inside Russia, where long lines of vehicles waiting to buy fuel have started to reappear, exposing the enormous economic price that Russia must pay for a prolonged conflict. After the phone call between Washington and Kyiv, public opinion humorously painted a scenario where Ukraine pledges not to attack oil tankers but decisively disables all military docks so that not a single drop of oil can leave port. The nightmare of an energy crisis and the silent shadow of a general mobilization are looming over Russia. On the battlefield, Ukraine has restarted a campaign that experts call long-range punitive measures, using firepower aimed directly at oil refineries deep inside Russian territory. The recent pivotal strike targeted the Osk oil refinery in Orenburg province, a strategic target located 1,400 kilometers from the front line, with a massive processing capacity of up to 6 million tons of crude oil per year. The destruction was so severe that local authorities had to declare a state of emergency, admitting that this key facility would be completely paralyzed for at least half a year because its core equipment imported from the West cannot be replaced under strict sanctions. The situation is so dire that a superpower with one of the world's largest oil reserves now has to implement wartime fuel rationing, limit quotas for individuals, ban stockpiling in canisters, and require vehicles to refuel alternately based on odd or even license plates. A harsh winter is truly knocking on the door of Russia's energy economy. Alongside strangling the fuel lifeline, Ukraine's drone strikes have also expanded to destroy the logistics network and the massive Wildberries e-commerce distribution centers across Russia. Numerous logistics complexes, each covering hundreds of thousands of square meters, have been burned down, causing the list of hit logistics centers to continuously grow from the top 10, from the top 20 to the top 30, with more than 80 key facilities severely damaged or completely flattened. The domestic supply chain has been seriously disrupted, not only dealing a heavy blow to the consumer economy, but also increasing social instability. Faced with relentless losses on all fronts, the specter of a new wave of military mobilization is once again casting a dark shadow over Russian cities. Draft notices have begun to be delivered directly to each family, bringing extreme anxiety and pushing many young Russians into a desperate crossroads: either face the harsh reality of brutal warfare or find every way possible to flee the country. The grim reality of the conscription campaign is silently casting a shadow over every family in Russian cities, turning daily life into a constant state of unease. Stories shared directly by those involved have exposed an increasingly sophisticated and suffocating system of coercion. A typical example is the case of a 38-year-old man who was shocked when he received a draft summons sent directly to his email inbox through the National Public Service portal Gosuzlugi. Accompanying the draft order was a list of harsh sanctions for failing to report on time, ranging from revoking property registration rights and suspending driver's licenses to an immediate travel ban. With only a few short days left under intense pressure, the troubling question, who is this war really for, and what lies ahead, has become a common concern for tens of thousands of people on the brink of the front lines. Why did Russia's advanced air defense shield miss? It's hard to believe. To further analyze the technical and tactical vulnerabilities of the Russian military on the Black Sea battlefield, the professional perspective of former US Navy Lieutenant Colonel David Stevens, a former air operations commander in the Gulf region, veteran FA-18 fighter pilot, and author of the Disaster Preparedness Handbook, has clearly dissected the decline in the quality of Moscow's military equipment. The footage of Ukrainian drones spectacularly evading interceptions by the Panzer I short-range air defense system has exposed serious technical flaws. Although the Panzer system is designed to work in conjunction with long-range air defense systems like the S-300 and S-400 to create a multi-layered protective shield. But in actual combat situations over open sea, completely unaffected by terrain interference or ground reflections, 3 consecutive surface-to-air missiles inexplicably missed their target. According to expert David Stevens, the surface-to-air missiles of the Panzer system use radio beam riding guidance from ground-based radar stations and do not have infrared or optical homing seekers in the terminal phase. In principle, with a continuous rod warhead combined with fragmentation similar to the AM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missile, along with a radio proximity fuse mechanism, the missile only needs to fly close to the drone's exhaust stream to automatically detonate and sweep away the target. The fact that Ukrainian drones could calmly fly through the missile smoke trail without any damage proves that the proximity fuse system was completely disabled or the radar's fire control algorithm encountered a serious malfunction. The underlying cause of these disastrous misses is not only due to the operator's clumsy handling, but is also likely rooted in the quality control crisis in the rushed weapon production lines of Russia's defense industry. Sharp analyses from a veteran who has spent his entire career in both operational planning and researching global risk prevention have further clarified the overall picture. Asymmetric warfare technology is gradually overcoming conventional weapon systems, reshaping the entire landscape of modern warfare. So, in your opinion, will Ukraine's independent development of 15 types of long-range attack weapons completely neutralize Russia's Black Sea fleet in the near future?